So, yes, in the last class we saw how to create a servlet, right? And we see how to map it to a form, HTML form. So that is where we have stopped. So today I'll show you people how to read that request information here in the servlet. Okay. Now, whenever this form is submitted, as I told you people, the browser will read the form data, including this action URL, and it will send it to the server. So on the server side, the server will take that request, and what it does is it will read that request information, and it will store that request information into the request object. You know, the server always creates a servlet request object. Just a second. Always it creates a servlet request object. In this servlet request object, it will store the request information. Request info is stored in the servlet in this object. In this object, I can say, and you'll have servlet response object where the client, sorry, the servlet can use this object to send the response back to the client. Okay, yes. So whenever the server takes a request from the client, so it will read the request information and will store that request information into the servlet request object, and it creates another object called a servlet response, who the server, which can be used by the servlet to send the response to that particular client. And you see, these two objects will be passed on to the servlet by calling the servlet's service method. Okay, you'll find that those two objects will be passed on to the servlet by calling the servlet's service method. So how I have a small question for you people. How this servlet is associated to that form? How the servlet is associated to the form? Yes. how do you associate a form to the servlet? No. You see, for the servlet, you got a URL, right? So this is the URL of the servlet. Now we'll use this URL. We'll assign that URL to the form action attribute. You got a form, right? In the form's action attribute, we'll assign that URL. Yes. Okay. So now when this form is submitted, the servlet's service method will be invoked. Okay, this servlet's register servlet service method will be called. And you see who will call the service method? The server. And you see the server, it will pass that request and response objects to the service, to the servlet here through the service method. Through the request object, the server will pass the request information to the servlet. And it provides the servlet response object to the servlet so that it can send the response back to the client. Okay, yeah. Now let's read that form data here. Let's see how to read that form data. Through the request object, you'll read it. So request dot, you got a method called as get parameter. So what is the parameter name? The text field name itself. If you want to read this text field value, first name text field value, you have to use that text field name. Okay, yes, first name. String first name. And similarly, last name. Then city. State. No, no, there is no state. And phone and email. Okay, phone, and email. That's it. Okay. This way, you see, through the request object, so we'll be able to read that form data here. Okay, we call them as parameters. They're known as parameters. Now, what to do with this data? Now, it depends on the requirement. can store it to the database. You can validate it. Okay. Yes. So in this case, I'll just send a response back to the client. I'll make this servlet, send a response back to the client, which will display this registration details to the client. Okay, whatever the details which you got here, this register details, so will be displayed back to the client. So that is what I'm going to do here. So let's see. Now, to send the response back to the client, servlet is supposed to use which object here? The response object. You see, response dot get writer. In the response object, you'll find a method called as get writer. We got a method called as get writer. So now the servlet here, you can use this get writer method to obtain an output stream, I can say. This get writer, what it does, it returns a print writer object reference. It returns a print writer object reference. I can say that it is an output stream which refers to the client. Normally we use streams to send the data, right? To transmit the data. You can think of it as an output stream which refers to the client here, not to the browser. Yes. So now once you got this out print writer, you can use it to send the response. Use println method. You see, let's say first name, I'll print it. Last name, city, email, and phone. Sorry, phone. Now for okay, just simple header, register details. See, in the browser, if you want to move the cursor to the next line, so we have to use br tag. Okay, use br tag. Okay, so that's all. So let me deploy this application on the server, and we'll host it and we'll run this application. Yes. Now I'll place the request for that register HTML page. So we got this form now. Here we'll type in that data. Say Harry J. You see, we'll submit this form. Click on register. Yes. So that servlet is invoked, which is able to read that form data, and it displays that form data back to the client here. Hello, can you people hear me? Okay, sorry, lost the connection. So this way, you see, you'll find that the servlet can respond to the client's request. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So what we did, is it clear for you people here? Any questions in this regard? Just check the servlet. So how it is using that request object to read the form data, and how it is using the response object to send the response back to the client. Yeah. Sorry. So is it clear for you people, all of you? Okay, good. Now let's implement another flow which will also demonstrate how the servlets can be used here. Okay. So for that, first of all, I'll show you people an image. Okay. So don't concentrate on this image. Just a minute. First, let me explain what we'll do here. So what I want to do is, I want to provide a search functionality. Users should be able to search for the product records through the web application which we got here. Users should be able to search for the product records using this web application. So to provide that search functionality, where are the product records? In the table, product table. Where are the product records? In the product table. Okay. So we will provide a search functionality through which users will be able to search for the product records. So this image, a diagram which you're looking at here, so it demonstrates how to implement that search functionality. So first of all, you see, we need a form, a page, a web page. We need a web page. In that web page, we need a form through which users will provide the product ID. In the form, you need, in the web page, you need a form through which users will provide the product ID, right? And we'll click on that search button. Now to handle this request, we need a servlet on the server side. Whenever this request is placed, you see on the server side, we got a servlet, a search servlet, which will take that request. It will read that product ID, and then what it does here, you see, it should search for that product record based on the product ID in the database server, right? It has to search for that product record in the database server. So this servlet, now it is taking the help of a DO. So what is a DO? We have discussed about the DOs, right? So what is it? What is a DO? Sorry. What is a DO? So it's a data access object, okay? And what is the responsibility of a DO? What it does basically? Just a second, please. Just a second. Okay, it provides an abstract interface to the database. Okay. So it provides the access to the database, right? It completely, its responsibility is to interact with the database server, DB server. Okay, but we have implemented that a DO pattern. See, we have developed a product DO, right? So this DO, you see, it helps us to interact with the database server, especially to fetch the product records, to add the product records, to update the product records and all. Yes. Fine. Now the servlet will take the help of this product TO to fetch the product records from the database server. Okay. Yes. Yep. Now the servlet, once it is done fetching the product record from the database server, you see, it has to display that product record back to the client. So the servlet will present that record, will display that product record back to the client. So this is how it works. This is how it is going to work here. Okay. Yes. So let's try to implement this. Let's try to implement this pattern. Not pattern, I'm sorry, this flow. So how do we start? First of all, what are we supposed to do here? So what is the first thing we need to do here? What do you people think? We need to create. Yes, how do we start? Okay, check the flow and tell me from where to start. First of all, we need to create a HTML page and add a form to that HTML page so that users can use that form to type in that product ID and submit that form. Okay. Yes. So first let's start with form. Create a page. You see, in the web content directory, I'm creating HTML file, HTML page here. You see, I'll call it as search HTML. I'll click on next, finish. So we need a HTML page. That's it. So we got this HTML page. So open with HTML editor. So always it is better to open the HTML pages with HTML editor. Okay. Yes, just a second. Open with HTML editor. Sorry. Now in this page, we'll add a header. We'll align it to the center. We'll call it as a search page or product search or search product. Anything is fine. Simple header. Okay. Now I'll add a form, and in this form, we'll add a text field so that users can supply the product ID. So input type equal to text, name equal to product ID, and we'll add a submit button. Again, we'll use input type input element itself, but the type attribute value should be submit. You can configure a value on top of that submit button. That's it. So we got a form. Now what is the next thing we need to do here? What do you people think? We got the form, right? So what's the next thing we have to do here? Create a servlet. Yes. So we need a servlet to handle this form request, right? So let's create a servlet. Now we'll take the help of servlet wizard here. New. We got servlet wizard option here. Servlet. Say product search. Servlet. So we'll make this class extends generic servlet class. Okay. So I'll click on next. So the URL is product search. So we'll click on finish. Okay. Now we got this servlet. So first of all, we'll link this servlet to that form, search form. Whenever the user submits that form, I want this servlet to be invoked. So what to do? Yes. How do we associate this servlet to that form so that whenever that form is submitted, this servlet will be invoked? Yes. Uh, Copy the URL. No. So this servlet's URL, whatever the URL you got for this servlet, we need to assign that servlet's URL to the form action attribute. Okay. So what is the URL of that servlet? Product search, right? So that URL of that servlet should be assigned to this form action attribute value. In the form, you'll have action attribute. So that action attribute value should be the URL of the servlet. So which indicates that this form request should be handled by the servlet whose action URL is product search. Is it clear for you people? Linking is important. Associating a form to the servlet is important. Yes, all of you. Is it clear? Okay. So hope you people got it. Yeah. So associating the form to the servlet. You see, when this form is submitted on the server side, which servlet should handle that request? How will you specify the details? When we submit the form on the server side, which servlet should handle the request? How will you specify the details? So you see that servlet's action URL, we will configure it in the form action attribute. You got this, all of you? The servlet's action URL, we'll configure it here in the forms action attribute. Okay. Now when this form is submitted, what happens? The product search servlet will be invoked because we have configured that servlet's URL in that form. Let's see how this form looks like. So this is your form here. Okay. Now let's write that request processing code in that form. Sorry, in that servlet. So what is this servlet supposed to do now? You see the service method of this servlet will be invoked when that form is submitted. So what are we supposed to do here in this service method in the servlet? Yes. So this servlet, it is supposed to read that product ID which is typed in that form, right? Product ID is actually typed in that form, so we need to read that product ID, right? Yes. So say request dot get parameter product ID, and here you see you'll get that product ID, right? The get parameter method returns that product ID which is typed in that text field product ID. But always that product ID which is written by this get parameter method will be string value. Always the get parameter method, what it does, it returns a string value itself. But product ID is not string value, right? It's an integer value. So what we'll do is here, we'll take that product ID, that is a string which is written by this get parameter method, and then we'll convert it into integer type. We'll convert it into integer type. Yes. Okay. So how to do that? So we got a class called as integer, predefined class called as integer. In that class, we got this method parseInt. In that class, we got this method parseInt. Okay, yes. So parseInt method, it's a static method defined in the integer class. It's a static method defined in the integer class. There is a class called as integer. And what it does basically, it returns, it takes a string value and converts it into integer value. Converts it into integer value and returns that value. Okay, we'll get the product ID. Yes. Now we got the product ID. We have read the product ID from the form. So what is the next thing we need to do here? Yes. We got the product ID, right? So we read it from the form. So what to do with this product ID, which you got here? What we are supposed to do? Okay. So user is providing a product ID. We'll send it. We'll send that product ID again. That's it. No. What are we supposed to do? What are we supposed to do? What are we supposed to do? We need to search for the product record in the database server. We need to search for the product record in the database server. Am I right? So we have to provide a search functionality to search for this product record, right? So that is what our aim is, to provide the product details based on that ID. User will provide the product ID. We have to return the complete product details back to the client. How? Where are the product details? In the database server, right? So we have worked with this product table, if you people remember. If you people remember, right? You see, we got the product details. So now how do we fetch that product details or product record associated to that ID? What to do? Come on, just now I explained it. You see the diagram, so it helps you people. Are you people able to follow me? So what I'm trying to explain. Hope this is clear, right? Any issues? So the search servlet now, it is supposed to take the help of product DO to fetch the record from the database server. Okay. So if you people remember, earlier we have created a DO in the JDBC API class, right? Yes. So already we have this DO, so I'm not going to create a new one again. Okay. So let's make use of this existing DO. Okay. So I'll copy this code, DO code. In the JDBC, we did that. I'm using that same DO here. I'll paste it here. You see, now we got that DO class. Okay, just a minute. One more thing, in the DOs we'll be using product class, right? So the product details will store it in the product object. Sorry. You see, we got a product class which helps us to store the product details. Product class objects will hold the product details. Now we got a product DO. In this product DO, you see, we got a method get product by ID. What it does, it takes a product ID, it will query for that product record, you see, using this select statement. It will fetch that record, and it will store that record into a product object. It will read that results, it will store that record into product object, and it returns that product object reference, right? So I've explained it, hope you people remember. Yes, as I told you people, all these concepts will be interlinked from now on. So now I'm going to use this DO method get product by ID to fetch that product records. Okay, so I've copied that code, the DO class and all here into this project. Straight away I copied that packages in which you got this DO class interface and the product class here. So in the product search servlet now, I'll do this. So I'll instantiate that DO class, and we'll call that method get product by ID, and that ID will pass it here. You see that product ID which the servlet is reading, it will pass it to this method DO method get product by ID. So what this method does, it returns a product object now straight away which holds the product details. Now you got that product object in which you will find that product details associated to that ID, so which are fetched from the database. And who did that? DO did that. Yes. So is it clear what we did here? Okay, now what is the next thing we need to do? We got the product details which are stored in that product object. So what to do? We got the product details, right? Yes, sorry. Data source. Already we are fetching it from the data source itself, that records. So we have fetched it from the data source. Again, why to send it to the data source? We have fetched the records from the data source itself, from the database itself. Have you noticed it? In the DO, that get product by ID method which you're using here, where it is in the DO. So what it is doing, it executes a select query, the DO. That method, it executes a select query. Means it fetches that record. So what to do with this product object? Display this product details back to the client. Whatever the data which you got in the product object, we have to send it back to the client. Okay, fine. So if you want to send that response back to the client, so what are we supposed to do here? So we need to obtain a print writer object. We need to obtain a print writer object here. Okay, yes. So how to obtain a print writer object? So we'll use response object, response dot get writer. Okay, use this get writer method to obtain a print writer object which is used to send the response back to the client. Okay, yes. Now out dot println. So I will display that product details. Okay, product details, product ID, product name, and product description. So we'll add a break. We'll add break statements to move the cursor to the next slide. Because it is in the browser, you can only move the cursor using the BR tag. Okay, so let's deploy this application on the server. Now we'll access the search page. See, I'm typing in the URL for that search page, search HTML. Okay, one important thing here. So we are using JDBC API. Sorry. So what is needed if you want to work with JDBC API? So JDBC API alone is enough, or do we need anything else apart from this? Yeah, we are using JDBC API, right? In this project, in the DOs, we got JDBC. So we're using JDBC, right? So I've added the DOs. The DO uses JDBC API. Now, when you're using JDBC API, is JDBC API alone enough? Or along with JDBC API, do we need anything else? Along with JDBC API, do we need anything else apart from JDBC API to work with JDBC API? Yes. You need something else. Along with JDBC API, you need JDBC drivers, right? So JDBC API is implemented by JDBC drivers. You need JDBC drivers. So if you don't add JDBC drivers, it won't work. So earlier we saw from where to download the JDBC drivers. I gave you people the details, right? So here I'll copy this URL, MySQL connector. Sorry, not URL, jar. This is the JDBC driver. I'll paste it here in the lib directory. You see, it's a web application, right? So we should not add it to the build path. Instead, so we have to add that jar, the JDBC driver, to the lib folder. Okay. Yes. You have to add it to the lib folder. That is what you need to do. Okay. Yes. So now let's deploy this application on the server and we'll test it. And then again I'll explain the flow once. So we got search page. So I'll type in the product ID. Let's say 102. You see we got the product details. Galaxy Edge, okay, price is 17,000, mobile. That's it. So I'll click on search. Let's see whether you'll get those details or not. Yes. So you got the details. Product ID 102, Galaxy Edge, price is 17,000. Description is mobile. So we got these details from the database. So how it works exactly? See, when you submit that form, first of all, the product search servlet will be invoked. Who will call this servlet service method? The server will call it. So whenever that form is submitted, the browser first of all will read that form details and it will create a HTTP request object and it will send the request to the server. You see, we got the flow here. You can try to understand what happens internally with the help of this. Please use this diagram. So now you see, when user submits that form, as part of that request, the product ID will be sent to the server. Not only product ID, but that servlet's action URL is also sent to the server. On the server side, the server will take that client's request, and internally what it does, as I told you people, it creates a request and response object. It adds that request information to the request object, and it uses response object to send the response back to the client. So server will create this request and response object and will call the servlet's service method and pass the request and response objects. Okay, service method will be invoked. servlet's service method is called. So when the servlet's service method is called, so it gets that request and response object. Now you see in this line, what the servlet is doing, it is reading that product ID which user has typed in. Okay, yes, and it it converts that product ID which is in the string format to integer type, to integer value. And then now you see now the servlet got the product ID, so it has to fetch or search for that product record based on the ID in the database server. The servlet has to fetch for this product record based on the ID in the database server. But servlet, it is not going to do it on its own. Instead, the servlet is going to take the help of the DO here. What the servlet does, it will take the help of the DO. So we got a DO which we have developed earlier, if you people remember. What it does, in the DO we got methods for each database operation, to fetch the records, to add the records, to update the records, to delete the records, the product DO which we have developed in JDBC classes. I'm using that same DO here, product DO. I'm instantiating that class and I'm calling the DO method get product by ID. Now what is the responsibility of this method get product by ID? You see, we are passing the ID as well, product ID which the servlet has read, I can say. Now the DO method get product by ID, which is when it is invoked, what it does, see, it takes that product ID, constructs a select query, and it obtains a connection, creates a prepared statement object. We'll take that product ID, assign it to that bind parameter which you got in the query. It executes that query, it gets a result set object. In that result set object, now you got the product record. Now it will read it. You see, the DO will create a product object and will read that product details from that result set object and will store it into the product object. Yes, and then it returns that product object reference here. That's it. Okay, so that is how it works. Now it returns the product object to whom, whichever method, whichever component is calling this servlet, sorry, this DO. Now which component is calling the DO? The servlet. Servlet is calling that DO method, right? So to this DO, sorry, to this servlet, the DO returns that product object. Okay, yes, the DO returns that product object to the servlet. In this product object, now you got that product details. So what we are doing here, now we'll obtain a print writer object, which is a output stream, I can say, which refers to the client, and it will display the product details back to the client using that output stream. We're using out.println method here. Okay, so this way, you see, we can search for the product records with the we can search for the product records. You see, we can provide that search functionality to the users. The users can easily search for the records, right? Now they don't need to worry about all this code. All they need to do is just use this form, search form, type in the product ID and click on search. Okay, yes. So internally, behind the scenes, the servlet will fetch that record based on that ID with the help of the DO and will present that product record back to the client here. So you see, client will get these details. Yeah. So is it clear for you people? Any questions in this regard? Any doubts? Okay, good. Hope others have also got this. Now, actually, we are displaying the product details this way, right? So it won't look that good. What I will do is, I'll use a table. So we'll use a table, HTML table, to display this product details. Okay. So I'll create a complete HTML page here. Dynamically, we'll create a HTML page. I'll show you people how we'll do that using a servlet. You see, I'm creating a page. I'll write that page content here. So we'll create a table, we'll add a row, and in this row, we'll add cells. Price and description. Next, what I'm doing here, I'm creating a table and adding a row to that table. In this row, you see, we got just column headings, I can say. Actually, for column headings, we can use another tag. Just a second. Use th tag. If you got column headings, then you can add that column headings using th tag, not td, sorry. And now the product, for displaying that product details, I'll create another row, you see, using tr tag. And here we'll add cells to this row, and we'll add the details. So already we got that code. Wait just a second, I'll make use of it. You see, we're reading that product ID, so I'll just wrap it in the cell. That product ID, we'll add it to a cell this way. Yes. Just a second. Sorry. So See, now we have added 4 cells. Each TD tag sheet is used to add a cell. Now we'll close this. Close this row, and we'll close the table as well. Now close the body and HTML tags. That's it. Okay. Now we have created a page altogether dynamically. Let me add border to this table. Okay. This time you will find that that product record will be displayed in a table. Yes. So I'll click on search. You see, now it looks better, right? So is it clear for you people? So we can create a search, sorry, we can create a page dynamically to render that response. So this is a dynamic resource, right? We are creating a web page dynamically, and you see this page content will change from request to request. The product ID or the product details can be different for each request, right? Yeah. So any questions? Okay, good. So now you understood the role played by the servlet, right? Yes. Okay, fine. So we'll talk about the servlet's life cycle and the initialization parameters. But let's do one thing. Give me 5 minutes. Okay, we'll take a break of 5 minutes, a short break of 5 minutes, and after 5 minutes we'll continue. Okay. Yes. So just a 5 minutes break, and then we'll continue. Yeah. I'll pause the meeting. That's it. Just be in the meeting. You can just come back after 5 minutes. Yeah. Okay, sorry. It's more than 5 minutes. So, can you people hear me? Okay, hope you people are also back, right? Yeah. Yeah. Can you people hear me? Okay, good. Now there are a lot of things which you need to learn here in this example. Okay. You see, there are various components involved in processing a client's request, and how these components are interacting with each other, how they are coordinating with each other. Now, can you people identify at least a few components which are involved in processing the client's request here? Yes. Components means objects, reusable objects here I can say. Yes. What are the objects which are involved in processing the client's request? Or objects in this example? Yes. The example which we saw. A servlet, product DO, am I right? And what are all the objects which are involved? Not only just servlet and product DO. Can you people identify the other objects which are involved here? Yes. Servlet is taking the help of product DO. Okay. Servlet also needs objects like servlet request and servlet response. What are all the objects involved here? Let's try to identify all those objects. And product DO uses connection object, repeat statement object, and we got product object. You see, so many objects are involved. Result set object. So many objects are involved in processing the client's request. So this is object oriented programming. You'll find that always you have objects. Okay. Yes. So now each object has got a responsibility. It got a specific task, or it does something. Okay. Let's try to identify what exactly they do. Now, can you people tell me what exactly the servlet is doing here? Yes. What exactly the servlet is doing? So here, you see, servlet is responsible for intercepting the client's request. It will take the client's request will read a request information, that input, right? It will read that request information. It reads that input which is provided by the clients, and then further it will process the request with the help of other components. It also sends the response back to the client, right? Yes. Okay. Here, what is the role played by the servlet request object here? What exactly it is doing in this case? So the servlet request object, it holds the request information. Servlet request object, what it does? It holds request information. Right? Yes. That is what the servlet request object does. It holds request information. And you see, I can say that through the request servlet request object itself, through the servlet request object itself, you'll find that the the server will be passing the request information, that input to this servlet. So that servlet can use it to read that input. Yes. Next, here you'll find that the servlet response object also plays a role in request processing, right? So what it does, you see, it will help the servlet to create a an output stream which refers to the client, so that this output stream can be used by the servlet to send the response back to the client. And product PO Now at least you tell me what this product DO does. You people are familiar with it. So yes, it encapsulates all the access to the database server. Very good, and it helps the servlet to interact with the database server, which is very important in processing this client's request, right? Because as part of this client's request, we have to fetch the product records from the database server. Yes. Okay. Here, what about the connection object? Now the DO uses this connection object to interact with the database server. DO uses connection object to interact with the database server. That is what the DO does, right? Yes. Sorry, connection object does. It helps the DO to interact with the database server. Connection object is essential. It represents the connection between the Java application and the database server. Now, prepared statement object, why it is used? Prepared statement object. It is used to execute the query. Execute the query. So prepared statement object here, it's mainly used to execute the query. So that is what the prepared statement method does. Okay, this prepared statement object will help to execute the query. So now what about result set object? It holds that record which is fetched as a result of executing the query, right? Yes. Okay. Next, product object also plays a role here. Yes. What exactly the product object does here? So what do you people think? product object also has got a role to play. So what it does, it holds that product of details, right? And it helps that this servlet or the DO to transmit the product details from the DO to the servlet. It's how the DO is able to pass the product details to the servlet through the product object itself, right? Yes. So here the product object, it is actually called as a transfer object. It is known as a, it is called as a transfer object. It is actually called as a transfer object. Why? Because it helps the DO to transmit the data from the DO to the servlet. How the DO is able to pass on the product details to the servlet through the product object itself, right? So that's the reason why it is actually called as a transfer object, or it is also called as a value object as well. Yes. Okay. Now, this way you see how many objects are involved in processing the client's request, you see, right? So it's a collaboration of objects. Each object has got its role to play here. Every object has got a role to play. Yes, that you need to understand. So that is what an object-oriented program is supposed to do. Create a, you know, objects and use them to handle a client's request. You've got different types of objects. Where each object has got a role to play here. Yes. Yes. Now, this is about a servlet, and you see what you will find in applications. It's all collaboration of objects. Now we'll talk about servlet lifecycle, so which is important. Servlet lifecycle. So before we talk about the servlet here, so you need to know about you should know about uh, something called as web container, or it is also called as servlet engine, web container or servlet engine. So what is the responsibility of the web container servlet engine, and what is it exactly? Web container, you'll find that it is actually part of your web server. Okay, it is actually part of your web server. And this web container plays a key role, I can say. The web container, it has got a key role to play. Yes. So this web container, a web server, it is mainly responsible for managing the life cycle of the servlet. Web container, which is it is part of your, it is an important component, we can say, in the web server, which is mainly responsible. It is responsible for managing the life cycle of the servlet. It is responsible for managing the life cycle of the servlet. Just a second, please. Just a second. Yeah, sorry. So it is responsible for managing the life cycle of the servlet. So what do we mean by managing the life cycle of the servlet? That is very important. Managing the life cycle of the servlet is here. So far, if you people have noticed it, you will find that we have defined the servlet classes, right? We have created the servlets. But did we ever instantiate the servlet class? Did we instantiate the servlet class? No, we didn't instantiate the servlet class. And here, you'll find that even we didn't call that service method, right? Yes. So we are not responsible for calling that service method also. Yes. Then who is instantiating this servlet class? Who is responsible for instantiating the servlet class here? You'll find that this web container itself is responsible for instantiating that servlet class. Not only that, calling that service method. Okay. Whenever the client places a request, calling that service method. Okay. That means placing the servlet into service. It is the responsibility of the web container itself. So when I say managing the life cycle of the servlet, that means the web container is responsible for instantiating, initializing the servlet, placing the servlet into service based on the client's request, and destroying the servlet. These are all the responsibilities of the web container itself. Okay. Life cycle is management means this, right? What is it? Instantiating the servlet, initializing the servlet, placing that servlet into service, and then destroying the servlet. So these are all the responsibilities of the web container itself. Okay. Yes. You'll find that web container is mainly responsible for this. Yeah. So we will just create a servlet, and I can say that we'll configure the details about the servlet in that using the annotations. Now the rest of the things will be taken care by the web container itself. Yeah. Now let's see how the container will manage the life cycle of the servlet. Okay. How the container will manage the life cycle of the servlet. Let's see. So this is where the servlet API comes into the picture. We'll refer to the servlet API. Now we saw that generally we create a servlet by extending generic servlet class, right? In order to create a servlet, we'll use this generic servlet class. So generic servlet class is a predefined servlet class. You know that it is part of your API. It's an abstract class, and you will find that the generic servlet class, it implements servlet interface. It implements servlet interface. Here we got an interface called a servlet. It's an interface. I'm just representing it by using that I. It's a I for interface. Okay, it's an interface. You'll find that this generic servlet class which we are using to create a servlet, it implements that servlet interface itself. Okay, so it implements that servlet interface. And generic servlet class, in turn you see our classes will extend them, right? So for example, you got product search servlet which we have created. It basically extends generic servlet class. Okay. Now servlet interface, it is the root interface of your servlet API. Servlet interface is considered as the root interface of the servlet API. Each and every servlet class, you'll find that directly or indirectly implements that servlet interface. Now let's try to get more details about the servlet interface from the API. Okay. Yes. So we'll refer to the API once. Yes. Java EE docs. Now we have to refer to Java Enterprise Edition docs documentation. So far we were referring to Java Standard Edition documentation, right? Now from now on we'll be referring to Java Enterprise Edition documentations because Servlet API is part of your Enterprise Edition. Yes. So we got this package Java Extract Servlet package, right? Yes. Now here in this package itself you will find the Servlet interface, which is considered as the root interface here. You see, there is a very good statement here regarding that servlet. What it says, a servlet is a small Java program that runs within a web server. Servlets receive and respond to requests from web clients, usually across HTTP. Yes. So you got the description about the servlet here. Please make a note of it, all of you. What is a servlet? So you got the details. Okay. Now you see, let's what we'll just check what methods are defined in this interface. Okay. Now all the servlets here, whatever the servlets which we create, you'll find that they'll be inheriting these methods. What are the methods? You see, these are the methods defined here. Okay. So out of 5 methods which you got here, 3 methods are important, which are called as servlets lifecycle methods. Okay, we'll go through them. Servlet lifecycle methods. So what are they? Number one is a init method into service method. Three is destroy method. See here, these 3 methods are considered as lifecycle methods of the servlet. Okay. Now let's see how the web container is going to use this methods to manage the life cycle of the servlet. We'll see how the web container will use this methods to manage the life cycle of the servlet here. Yes. Okay. So for this, I'll give you people some notes also. So just make a note of it. So first, init method. You see, init method is used to initialize the servlet. Init method. So it is used to initialize the servlet. Initializing the servlet means, what do you think initializing a servlet means? What does that means? Initializing means, you see, acquiring any resources which are needed for the servlet to process a client's request. For example, for suppose let's say the client needs a servlet needs a connection object, let's say. Servlet needs a connection object. Yes. Then you see acquiring that connection, we can write it in that init method. Okay. Yes. Here you see you'll find that the container, after instantiating the servlet, it will call this init method here. Okay. Yes. It will call the init method. Immediately after instantiating the servlet, it will call the init method. You see, in that init method, we'll be writing that initialization code. Yes. Here we got service method. In the service method, you will find that basically it is used to handle a client's request. Okay. Yes. So that request processing code, the client's request processing code, you will find that it will be written in the service method. When the service method is called, each time the client places a request. Okay. Yes. Okay. Next, you see that is what is written here. Service method is used to handle the client's request. Whenever a client places a request, container delegates the task of processing the request to servlet by calling service method of the servlet. Okay. Next, destroy method. It is used to write the cleanup code. So when I say cleanup, cleanup code, what does that means? Can you people tell me? Cleanup code means, cleanup code means releasing the resources which are required, okay, while initializing the servlet. You see, during the initialization, if there are any resources, if they have been acquired, so writing the code to release such resources. For example, closing the connection or closing the stream. You see, these are all examples of releasing the resources or cleaning the resources. Okay, we say cleanup code, so it is actually called as cleanup code. Yes. Okay, fine. Now, when this destroy method is called, when the container decides to destroy the servlet, it invokes the destroy method. And once the destroy method finishes execution, the container will destroy that servlet. Yes. So this way the container will manage the life cycle of the servlet using this life cycle methods. Okay. Now before we move any further here, I have a question. You need to know this answer for this question. The container here, will it create a new servlet class object, or will it instantiate the servlet class whenever a client places a request? When a client places a request, the container, will it instantiate the servlet class? For each client's request, the container, will it instantiate the servlet class? For suppose, let's say, let me ask you people this way. If 10 clients have placed a request for a servlet. Okay, for example, take our servlet itself, product search servlet. 10 clients have placed a request for that servlet. So how many times the servlet class will be instantiated? How many servlet class objects will be created? Product servlet class objects will be created. Only once. Okay, just once. You'll find that the servlet class object is instantiated just once. No matter how many clients place a request for a particular servlet, see that servlet will be instantiated only once. Okay. A single servlet class object, a single servlet class object can be used to process any number of clients requests. A single servlet class object can be used to process any number of clients requests. Yes. Okay. Now based on that, can you people tell me in a servlet's life cycle how many times the init method will be called in a servlet's life cycle? Init method, how many times it is invoked in the servlet's life cycle? In a servlet's life cycle, how many times the init method is invoked? Only once. Yes. You see the init method in the servlet's life cycle, it is just invoked once. It is just called once. That's it. In the servlet's life cycle, how many times the service method is invoked in the servlet's life cycle? How many times the service method will be invoked? In the servlet's life cycle, how many times the service method will be invoked? It depends on the number of clients requests. You can say it depends on the number of clients requests, right? Now here, if 10 clients have placed a request, then the service method will be called 10 times. Yes, that's right. You can also say each time the server receives a request from the client, so it will call the service method of the servlet. Yes. Okay. Next, what about the destroy method? How many times it is called? only once in the servlet's life cycle. You will find that the destroy method, it is only called once, just once. Okay. So now let me show you people how to use this init method and destroy method. We already saw service method. Okay. Now let's go back to this product search servlet. Here in the product search servlet, this servlet is taking the help of the DO, you see, to interact with the database server. I can say the DO is a resource for the servlet. Okay, a DO is a resource for the servlet, I can say. Yes. Now we have written this code to obtain the DO in the service method. That means each time a client places a request, you know that the service method will be called, and the DO object is also created, which is used by the client. Sorry, which is used by the servlet. Yes. You know what? Here, if 100 clients have placed a request, then how many product DO objects are created? How many product DO objects are created? If 100 clients have placed a request, how many product DO objects will be created? In this case, 100, because each time the client places a request, the service method will be called. Each time the client places a request, you see the service method will be invoked. Yes. But do we need to create a new product DO object each time the client places a request? What do you people think? Is it really necessary to create a new DO object, a product DO object each time the client places a request? What do you people think? We don't need it. Yes, that's right. Yep. So this is unnecessarily creating objects, okay, more than what we require. So what to do then? This is where we'll use the init method here, okay. So to initialize such resources, we'll use the init method. You see, I'll override the init method, so which is inherited from the generic servlet class, okay. Yes. So you'll find that in this init method now, I can write that code to obtain that product object, which is initialization itself, I can say, because we need that product object, right? Yes. So now I'll write this code here, obtaining the product object code. I'll write it in the init method. Now will it make any difference? So if you're thinking, does it make any difference? Yes, what do you people think? I can say yes, it definitely makes some difference. Okay. You'll find that this time only one product day object is created. Why only one product day object is created? Because in the servlet's lifecycle, that init method is invoked once, just once. The init method is invoked once. Okay. The init method, it is just invoked once. So the product day object, the code which are written to instantiate that product day object, you see, it executes only once now. So hope you people got it. See, no matter how many times the client places a request, you see the same product day object will be used by the servlet to process the client's request. Okay. So is it clear for you people? Any questions in this regard? Any questions? Okay, good. Now similarly, we can also use we got destroy method here. Okay, we got destroy method. Destroy method, you'll find that it is used to write the cleanup code, as I told you people. Destroy method is basically used to write the cleanup code. Yeah. So when I say cleanup code, in our case, in this example, I can say, you see, now once we are done using that product data object, you see, now we can make it eligible for garbage collection. Whenever the servlet is about to be destroyed, whenever the servlet is about to be destroyed, you see, we can make that a DO object eligible for garbage collection. Because if the servlet is going to be destroyed, now there is no need for that DO object as well, right? There is no need for that DO object. Yes, so it can be destroyed. Okay, so now another example which I'll give you here is, for suppose, let's say this servlet as part of processing the request, it needs a connection object. The servlet needs a connection object. Now here you can write the code to establish the connection in the init method. You can write the code to establish the connection in the init method, and once the init method finishes execution, the connection will be ready, right? Now you see that connection object, you can use it you can use it so that servlet will use it. Okay, connection object, the servlet will use it accordingly. Okay, yes, fine. Now once the servlet is about to be destroyed, now we can close that connection in the destroy method here. We can close the connection in the destroy method. Yes. So this way we can use the destroy method and init method. To initialize the resource, we use the destroy method. To clean up that resource, we use the destroy method. To initialize the resource, we use init method. To destroy the resource, we use destroy method here. To clean up the resource, I can say, in other words, we use destroy method. Yep, that's it. Okay, fine. Now here, you know, well, if you want to initialize any resource, sometimes you may need some input values to initialize that resource. Some initialization values, I can say. You may need some initial values here or input values to initialize that resource. So in that case, what to do? How will you pass the initialization parameters? Let's see. So for that, we can do this. Web init parameters. Just a second. Just a second. Init parameters equal to iterate web init parameter name, say for example, say URL, and you can configure a value for this, say http, sorry, say jdbc colon double slash, sorry, mysql colon double slash localhost. You know what I did now? I've configured an initialization parameter. That means it's nothing but an initial value which will be passed on to this init method. How it is passed on to the init method? Through the config object. So basically the servlet config object which you got here, it holds the configuration details of the servlet, which includes the servlet name, servlet's URL, and initialization parameters. Now that initialization parameters, so we can use them here in the init method. So config dot, you see we can read that initialization parameter this way. Get init parameter, and you can pass that parameter name. What is it? URL. And what is the value? You got that value. URL. This way. You can configure more than one initialization parameter here. Okay. Now you can do this here if you got more than one initialization parameter. Then just a second. Just a second. Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay, you see we got one initialization parameter here. Okay, now what if you got if you want to configure more than one initialization parameter? Now we can add a comma here and then add at the rate web init parameter, add brackets. Again, you can configure a initialization parameter and assign a value to this way. For example, let's say username values root, something like this. So again, you can access that initialization parameter here this way: string username config generate parameter username. That's it. So this way we can configure the initialization parameters, and when they are passed on to that servlet, you see when this init method is called, the container will pass that initialization parameters to the init method here. Okay. So is it clear for you people? Any questions? Okay, fine. So now you see this initialization parameters which you have configured, they're only for this particular servlet. Sometimes you may need initialization parameters for more than you may have more than one init. You may have you may have more than one servlet which needs this initialization parameters. Now you see this initialization parameters, they are very much specific to this servlet. Okay. Let's say I want to configure initialization parameters which can be used by all the servlets in the application, or any servlet should be able to access that initialization parameter. Then how will you configure them? They are called as context parameters. Context parameters. Context parameters. And this context parameters basically they're configured in the web.xml file. We have to configure them in the web.xml file. Here. So you have to do this. Param name, for suppose let's say uh, driver, as just an example. Values org dot gjt dot mysql dot driver. Yes. Now this is a context initialization parameter. You know what? Any servlet can access this initialization parameter. How? You'll find that the context initialization parameters, they will be stored in servlet context object. We got an object called a servlet context object. You know, uh, it is important to know about this object. Servlet context object represents the web application. Okay, represents a web application, I can say. For each application, for each web application, a servlet context object is created. When it is created, the web container, or the container, creates a servlet context object when the application loads or starts successfully. In the servlet context object, the application configuration details, including initialization parameters or context parameters, I'm sorry, context parameters are stored in the I'm sorry, that's it. Okay, so this is how it works. Now, one more important point. Servlet context object by default, it is accessible to all these servlets in the application. Okay, it is accessible to all the servlets in the application. Okay, now let's see how to access this context parameter in the servlet. Now, first of all, to access the context parameter, you need which object? Which object is needed? Yes. Yes. Context object. As I told you people, the context parameters are stored in context object. You need a context object. So how will you obtain a context object? You see, through the config object, you can obtain a context object reference. Config.getServletContext. This way. Okay. Now in the context object, we got this method getInit parameter. We can use this method, and you can read that initialization parameter, context parameter with this name. That's it. This is important. Obtaining context object. In future, we use this context object. Mm, we use this context object. Please make a note of it. Okay. Now we can obtain a context object here this way as well. Request dot get servlet context. Okay, through the request object also we can obtain the context object. Again, you see, we can obtain that initialization parameter this way. So through the config object and through the request object, we can obtain a context object. Okay. So what is the difference between this initialization parameters which we have configured in the servlet class and the initialization parameter which we have configured in the web.xml file? What is it? What did I say? Yes. What is the difference? So these are global initialization parameters. Context parameters are global initialization parameters. Any servlet can access this context parameters which you got here. Okay. Through the context object, this context parameters can be accessed. So what about the initialization parameters which you have configured here in the servlet? They are only specific to this particular servlet. And you see a servlet can access this initialization parameters through config object, servlet config object. So to that init method, you see that config object is passed. Yes. Which is very much specific to this particular servlet. Yes. That's it. Okay. So any questions in this regard? Just let me know. Okay, fine. So I'll do one thing. I'll stop it here. Okay. So this is about your servlet so far. So in the next class, we'll see how one servlet can coordinate with another servlet. Okay, that means as a client's request will be processed by multiple servlets. More than one servlet will be involved in processing a client's request, and how the servlets can coordinate with each other. Okay, and such things, how the servlets can share the data. So all such things we'll discuss in the next class. Okay, yes. So that's all for today then. So thank you all. So